elements of Genshin are the building blocks of the world, and today I want to theorize on not only the 7 known playable elements in the game, but also the 5 theoretical elements that have been introduced in the background through the lore. Disclaimer: this is all just speculation and nothing here is truly indicative of the final product, but I wanted to discuss the more scientific side of the elements versus the aspect of them that we see in the game. Genshin's elements derive a lot from philosophical topics and structures, but the lore behind them in-universe is also equally fascinating, and even more so with the introduction of newer elements as the series progresses. I'm also more interested in the lore aspect of the elements and not the gameplay. Gameplay elements tend to put a blanket description of wind equals air equals animo and the like, but the lore actually complicates things by a lot. So, let's begin. The word element is a fascinating term that's really frequent in fantasy worlds but have yet to actually be defined properly when discussing it in a theory. Some people refer to elements as the manifestation of natural and artificial energy, which is why they're tangible. Some refer to it as an ingredient for something else, which is why if you can see the effects of an element, they're considered an element. Some consider physical as the lack of an element, something like zero being the absence of anything. So, for today, I'll be defining element as a concept or energy that has physical manifestations or effects that can be seen and manipulated. I think that pretty much summarizes both the elements that we're used to playing in the game and the more obscure elements that I'll be going into because there's actually a lot of them. The primary elements of Genshin Impact are the elements that the world encounters on a daily basis, which encompass Animo, Geo, Pyro, Electro, Hydro, Dendro, and Cryo. But there's actually a deeper lore that encompasses these, because in the world of Genshin, the elemental terminologies of wind, earth, fire, lightning, thunder, and water exist. A Reddit user by the name Transwarp Drive also asks this question and found the description of the Hydro slimes, stating that due to the high concentration of Hydro within the slimes, direct ingestion is, in fact, harmful to the human body, which begs the question of what's the innate difference of water and Hydro and what's inside Hydro that makes it harmful. It's also important to note that some semantics in the English lore specifically delineate the O elements as elements, while the natural phenomena like fire, earth, water, and air just said as it is. So it's better to think of water, fire, air, and the like as the raw untampered energies that make up the natural composition of the world. So an ocean isn't a body of Hydro, it's a body of water. Their O elements, though, are more empowered versions of them that have direct after effects that can alter composition. For example, wind is the rawest form of Animo, and a coagulation and manipulation of Animo through elemental control can lead to flight. The stronger the concentration, the stronger the effects. This is similar to other elements. Earth and rock are the rawest forms of Geo, and manipulation can lead to construct making and structure assembly. Something like that. Moving on to the history, the lore of the elements actually runs a bit deeper than at first glance because of the complicated history of Tivat. We first begin with the fact that there exists something known as the Elemental Realm or the Light Realm, the home of the Bishops and other primordial elemental creatures that preluded the coming of the gods. The 7 sovereigns, for example, were defined as the 7 foremost elemental dragons at the pinnacle of the raw and primitive elemental forces, which further cemented the reason the dragon sovereign of water is called that way and not the sovereign of Hydro was because they pre-existed both the terminology and the concentrated version of the elements, which is actually really fascinating. We also note that the primordial creatures that survive to this day have adapted to the newer versions of the elements, meaning that they didn't originally wield them. The baptismal bishops, for example, explicitly have adapted due to social altercations. They manifested their new forms to align with their respective O elements, Bolt Eater for Electro and Rimebiter for Cryo. They needed to adapt and adjust their biological characteristics. But the consequence is the following statement. Following the fading of the 7 sovereigns' power, a new generation of sovereigns is presently being born. But now that the baptismal bishops have evolved in this manner, they have lost their purity. As such, the Dragon of Water will no longer be born from among their ranks. The concentrated elements are foreign to the bodies of these bishops, and they're forced to adapt. It's also very possible that the coming of the newer elements was a byproduct of the primordial one's intervention in recreating the new world after the reign of the sovereigns, which is why the new elements, while more congested and influenced by elemental energies, are not considered the purest forms. One strange outlier to this, though, is Apep, the original ruler of Sumerus forests prior to the coming of the primordial one, who is referred to by 2 monigers, Lord of Verdure, and Dragon of Dendro. The problem is that Dendro doesn't automatically mean just plants, and if anything, it hardly has anything to do with plants. Dendro's more so used in relation to Electro to deliver currents and recreate schemas, diagrams, and patterns unique to the user. It hardly has the vibe of forest magic, plant growth, and druidcraft that we should be familiar with, which is actually super cool. But that still begs the question. Did Apep also adjust based on the current landscape and elemental energies of Sumeru, or was Dendro just a primordial element unlike the rest of them? Who knows, really? The interchangeability of the elements is really fascinating if you think about it, especially when you consider that the archons have very specific naming conventions. Venti and Zhongli aren't usually referred to as the wind god or the earth god, but instead Animo and Geo. A is referred to though as the Narukami Okusho, god of thunder, but the legitimacy of that title is unknown because that is part of a figurine. The name card colors of the rainbow hints that light can refract into countless colors, but people stop at 7 because they're too lazy to count. Perhaps the elements are like that too. And in the realm of Genshin's world building, we've seen the potential for newer elements as we see the more divine characters come into play, and these are the elements of time, space, ether, void, and Cosmo. So, let's begin. The terminology ether and void were used in the Byakuya-koku collection Baptismal Bishop experimental records as a replacement for the notations of the files. It hasn't particularly been used again afterwards. Ether, most especially, has hardly been defined in the lore, but void has been referenced multiple times considering it's interchangeable with the word abyssal. My theory is that these are the monikers for the light and dark energies of the realms. So, let's begin with the element of light, or ether. Now, here's my question. Is it a good idea to use the word celestial when talking about light energy? My personal answer to this is no. Unlike other games, I think that the word celestial isn't the right term when describing the energies of light because Celestia, as an entity, wields other forms of elements that we'll get to later. Celestial creatures also wield the regular elements, and there's no direct proof that Venti, Zhongli, Nahida, and A are able to control the light energy. Radiant, holy, or just light energy would be good enough replacements though. This was a mistake that I've been really guilty of, so I'm just going to make peace with that fact. Ether is a medium that in the wave theory of light permeates all spaces and transmits transverse waves. Luminiferous aether is a hypothetical medium for transmitting light and heat, something that is well defined in how the traveler wields their light energy. Light energy is the yellowish energy that appears as holier than thou, sometimes referred to as a combination of several sources of energy. This could be the initial element of the traveler prior to their sealing into Vat, as we see a yellow glow around their weapon when first summoning it against the sustainer, and the white in their clothes that the elemental light will eventually replace. Light energy has been used offensively in the game by the Traveler when fighting the Heavenly Principles, coagulating into a smite-like explosion. Light energy, though, has also been wielded by the Traveler after that experience, suggesting that despite the sealing of their powers, there's still semblances of it in their body. The scene where the Traveler listens to the call of the visions and manifests a bright yellow energy when triggering the mass concentration of them is an example, as well as the Osayo fight in Liyue before the drop of the Jade Chamber where everyone manifests their energy into the Traveler. Light energy is also connected to the concept of cleansing, as this was the energy used by the Abyssal Lector to commence purification of the land, and Yai's cleansing ritual. This can also be the reason why the Traveler is innately resistant to the void energies that the Festering Desire have, and why they were able to cleanse the tears of the Valen from the abyssal energy. But when there is light, there is darkness. Abyssal energy, or void energy, is the deep royal purple with black energy that's so pretty that we see contaminating creatures and is antithetical to elemental and light energy. Void doesn't really have that much of a distinction to it compared to other elements. It's more so a psychic element, as it shows an embodiment of darkness that is able to take forms of both physical energy and psychological voices. But there's another aspect to void energy that I find very fascinating. Abyssal energy has been able to take on the forms of other elements according to the lore, as is with the case of the Pyro Lector wielding not pyro, but something formerly known as abyssal fire, which is actually pretty cool. The members of the Abyss Order are able to wield the O elements perfectly fine, but they are also able to weave their abyssal alternatives. Though we know that this is a physical element that can be potentially wielded by the traveler because we've seen our sibling use it. Now we go on to the more abstract elements of Genshin that I want to cover, and these are the divine elements. If you've ever played Final Fantasy, you'd be familiar with the term green magic, or a type of chrono manipulation that speeds up allies and slows down enemies. Time as an element was best showcased in the 2.5 cutscene, where the manifestation of growth is in the physical representation. The difference though is that unlike the other elements in this video, time doesn't have the most concrete of energies. It isn't like a beam or a structure-based element that has its concrete color, more so because time manipulation manifests in how things around it are changed. The closest we have to this is in A's story quest, where future manipulation was depicted by schematic-like blueprints created from bluish lines. But I think that has less to do with time, the element itself, but more so the color of the plane during the character's story quest. But it would be pretty cool if the time element does have the ability to give future projections, the potential what-ifs and structures that could be created in the future displayed for the wielder to see. Space was an element that I was considering at first if it should truly be added to the list, because spatial control is such an abstract phenomenon that it isn't like the other elements that are exclusive to itself. Teleportation in Genshin exists through the other primary elements, so space would be a copy of that. But when I really thought about it, I feel like space is a much stronger iteration of it. I think that if I were to define an element called space, I'd consider the physical manifestation of the sustainer's powers. The royal red and black would be such a great addition to Genshin's roster, by the way. The theoretical element of space has several components: stasis, compressions, and teleportation. Spatial manipulation shouldn't be confused though with cosmic manipulation, because I think that Genshin's equivalent of Cosmo would be something else. The sustainer is able to use her element to compress creatures and energies into smaller boxes, as well as reduce and enlarge her boxes both offensively and defensively. The concept of space can also be the reason that creatures can store things in demiplanes, similar to the Serenity Pot and Paimon's mysterious teleportation. This is the last element that I want to talk about because this is Dainsleif's theorized element. I was considering if this element resembled the void energy, and while I admit that it does on paper, I'll be giving his power another classification for simplicity's sake. And also because wielding abyssal energy in and of itself has some unfortunate circumstances and consequences to one's physical body that only a select few are truly immune to. So let's consider something else for this video. Dane's introduction into the Devout preview shows the energy he wields as a blue fire, leaving behind a smoky residue when he uses it. It doesn't flow the same way that Hydro does, and its particle effects are much more flame-like. We also see that whatever this energy is, it's currently coursing through Dane's veins, emanating a bluer teal that's brighter than Hydro, bluer than Anemo, and darker than Cryo. Yeah, I checked. So whatever that element is, I wonder if this is the element of Conria, considering his description is that humanity will define this world with power from beyond, further cementing that this isn't from this world. Now, I hope that this isn't just a recolored abyssal void energy, but only time will truly tell. So for now, I'll consider this mysterious element as Cosmo because of the O convention. And if I were to theoretically name these 5 elements with the O convention that Genshin loves, I'll name the light one Halo, Danes as Cosmo, time as Chrono, leaving us behind with Spatial and Void as which honestly, I don't think Void should have an O conventional name because, well, it's different, it's special like that. But that's it for me. A more relaxed video into the obscure elements of Genshin because I have nothing better to do. And I would just like to do an announcement that I'll be roaming around Conquest in the event that you guys find me. You will find me if you eventually find a really massive sign. Please don't hurt me, I am very short, but if you do find me, I've got something special for you. Because it's safer that way anyway. My name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. Bye-bye!